The muddy water hit Miranda Hayes with such force that she actually stumbled backward. Cold, dirty liquid soaked through her coat, her dress, even her shoes. For a moment, she just stood there at the bus stop, dripping and stunned, while her shopping bags lay scattered on the sidewalk where she'd dropped them. Then she heard the laughter. The black Mercedes idled at the curb, its tinted window rolling down just enough for her to see inside. Julian. Her ex-husband sat in the driver's seat, that familiar smirk on his face. The woman beside him, Candace, his new wife, had her perfectly manicured hand over her mouth, but her eyes sparkled with cruel amusement. "Oh my God, Julian, you got her good." Candace's voice carried across the street. "Look at her." Miranda stood frozen as pedestrians stopped to stare. Some pulled out their phones. An elderly woman asked if she was okay, but Miranda couldn't find her voice to respond. She could only watch as Julian leaned across his wife to call out the window. "Sorry about that, Miranda. Didn't see the puddle?" His tone made it clear he'd seen it perfectly well. "You should really get a car." "Oh wait, you can't afford one anymore, can you?" Candace dissolved into fresh giggles. She was wearing the diamond bracelet Julian had promised to buy Miranda for their 5th anniversary. He'd never gotten around to it, claiming business expenses were too high that year. Apparently business had improved. The Mercedes pulled away, leaving Miranda standing in the settling spray of dirty water. Her hands trembled as she bent to gather her bags. The groceries inside were probably ruined. She'd used the last of her weekly budget on them. A young man helped her collect the scattered items. "That was messed up," he said quietly. "You want me to call someone?" "No. Thank you. I'm fine." Miranda's voice came out steady despite everything. She'd had practice at staying composed when everything inside her was screaming. The bus arrived 10 minutes later. Miranda sat in the back, aware of the other passengers keeping their distance from her wet, muddy clothes. She stared out the window at the city passing by, the city where she'd lived for 8 years as Julian Hayes' wife, back when people knew her name, when she'd attended charity galas and fundraising dinners, when she'd believed her marriage meant something. That was before she'd discovered the affair. Before the divorce that had stripped her of nearly everything. Before she'd learned exactly how vindictive a man could be when his ego was bruised by a wife who dared to leave him. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Miranda pulled it out, careful not to drip on the screen. "Adrian, just landed. Can't wait to see you. How was your day?" Miranda looked down at her ruined clothes and felt something shift inside her chest. She thought about the private ceremony 3 days ago. The way Adrian had looked at her when he'd slipped the ring on her finger. The weight of that ring hidden now beneath her glove because she wasn't ready yet for the world to know. She typed back, "Interesting. Tell you about it when you get home." "Adrian, home. I love that word. See you in an hour." Miranda allowed herself a small smile. Julian had no idea that the pathetic ex-wife he'd just humiliated at a bus stop had spent her morning having tea with the Prime Minister's wife. He had no idea that the ring hidden under her glove was worth more than his precious Mercedes. He had no idea that she'd chosen to take the bus today simply because her new car was being detailed and she'd wanted the fresh air. Most of all, he had no idea that in 1 week at the foundation gala she'd spent 6 months planning, the entire city would learn exactly who Miranda Hayes had become. But he would find out soon enough. The bus lurched to a stop at her corner. Miranda gathered her bags and stepped off into the late afternoon light. She walked the 2 blocks to the townhouse, the one Adrian had insisted she keep in her name alone, the one with the address Julian didn't know. Her old life and her new life existed in separate worlds right now, but those worlds were about to collide. She climbed the steps and unlocked the door. Inside, everything was warm and quiet. Their home. She still wasn't used to thinking of it that way. After the cold, empty mansion she'd shared with Julian, this place felt like a sanctuary. Miranda dropped her bags in the entryway and headed upstairs to shower. The hot water washed away the mud and the cold, but it couldn't quite wash away the memory of Candace's laughter or the look on Julian's face. That mixture of contempt and satisfaction, like he'd won something. Let him think he'd won. For now. She dried off and changed into soft clothes, then went to the kitchen to salvage what she could from her groceries. Most of it was fine. The bags had protected the contents from the worst of the water. She was putting vegetables in the refrigerator when she heard the front door open. "Miranda?" Adrian's voice immediately eased the remaining tension in her shoulders. She turned as he appeared in the kitchen doorway, still in his suit from the conference, his tie loosened. He was tall and lean, with warm brown eyes that always seemed to actually see her, not through her or past her, but really see her. "Hey," she said softly. He crossed to her immediately, pulling her into his arms. Bad day. How did you know? You're making dinner at 4 in the afternoon. You only stress cook when something's wrong. He pulled back to study her face. What happened? Miranda hesitated. Part of her wanted to brush it off, to not let Julian's petty cruelty have any more space in her life. But Adrian had been clear from the start. They didn't keep things from each other. I ran into Julian today, she said finally. Literally. He splashed me with muddy water at the bus stop. On purpose. His wife thought it was hilarious. Adrian's jaw tightened. Where? Doesn't matter. It's done. Miranda? I'm fine. She put her hand on his chest. Really? It was humiliating in the moment, but I'm fine. It actually helped me realize something. What's that? I'm done hiding. She met his eyes. Next week at the gala, I want everyone to know. About us. About everything. No more keeping it quiet. They'd agreed when they got married to wait a few months before making it public. Miranda had wanted time to establish her foundation on its own merits, without people thinking she was using Adrian's family name. Adrian had understood, even though his parents had been less thrilled about keeping their new daughter-in-law a secret. Now Adrian studied her face carefully. You're sure? We don't have to rush this because of what happened today. I'm not rushing. I'm ready. Miranda smiled. Besides, the look on Julian's face when he finds out will be worth it. I thought this wasn't about revenge. It's not. But that doesn't mean I can't enjoy the irony. She reached up to loosen his tie completely. He spent 45 minutes in court explaining to the judge why I deserved nothing from our marriage. He told everyone who'd listened that I was a leech, that I'd contributed nothing to his success. Today he splashed mud on me like I was trash on the street. He's going to regret that. Probably. But that's not why I'm doing this. Miranda pulled the tie free and draped it over her shoulder. I'm doing this because I'm proud of what we have. I'm proud of the work I've done. And I'm tired of living like I have something to hide when I don't. Adrian cupped her face in his hands. Have I mentioned that I love you? Not in the last 8 hours. Unacceptable. I love you. He kissed her forehead. I love you. Her nose. I love you. Her lips. Miranda melted into him, letting the last of the day's tension drain away. This was what Julian had never understood. Love wasn't about possession or control or proving something to the world. It was this. Simple moments in a kitchen on a Tuesday afternoon. Someone who saw you covered in mud and loved you anyway. Someone who gave you space to build your own dreams and celebrated every step forward. So next week, Adrian said when they finally broke apart. We tell everyone. Next week, Miranda confirmed. The foundation gala. Black tie. 500 guests. Every major donor, politician, and journalist in the city. Including Julian and Candace, who bought tickets before they knew I was involved. This is going to be quite an evening. Yes, Miranda agreed. Yes, it is. 3 months earlier, Miranda had been sitting in the hospital break room when Adrian first walked in. She'd been volunteering at City General for 2 months by then, helping in the children's ward during her afternoons. It was something she'd wanted to do during her marriage, but Julian had always dismissed it as a waste of time. Why would you work for free? He'd asked. It makes me look bad, like I can't provide for you. After the divorce, volunteering had been one of the first things she'd done with her freedom. The pay was nothing, because there was no pay, but the work fed something in her soul that had been starving for years. She'd been eating a sandwich and reviewing her notes on the new patients when a man sat down across from her. She'd looked up, ready with her polite smile for whoever needed her attention, and found herself looking into the kindest eyes she'd ever seen. Sorry, is this seat taken? He gestured to the chair. No, go ahead. He sat, setting down his own coffee and sandwich. He was dressed casually, jeans and a sweater, but there was something about him that suggested he didn't usually dress that way. Maybe it was the watch, understated but clearly expensive, or the way he carried himself. Confident but not arrogant. They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes. Miranda went back to her notes. The man pulled out his phone and scrolled through messages. You volunteer here? He asked after a while. Miranda looked up. Yes. Children's ward. You. Visiting. A friend's daughter is a patient. I've been coming by to read to her. He smiled. I'm not very good at it. She fell asleep during Goodnight Moon yesterday. That book is designed to put kids to sleep. Is that why? I thought I was just boring. Miranda laughed. It felt strange, she hadn't laughed with a man in a long time. I'm Miranda. Adrian. He reached across the table to shake her hand. His grip was warm and firm. "Nice to meet you." That had been the start. Over the following weeks, they kept running into each other at the hospital. Adrian came to read to little Sophie Bennett, a 6-year-old with leukemia. Miranda often worked in Sophie's section. They'd grab coffee in the break room or walk through the hospital garden during breaks, talking about everything and nothing. Adrian never mentioned his family or what he did for work. Miranda got the impression he had money, his clothes were too nice, his education too obvious, but he didn't flash it around. He listened more than he talked. He asked real questions about her life and actually seemed interested in the answers. She didn't tell him about Julian at first. Didn't mention the divorce or the humiliation of it or how some days she still felt like she was walking through fog. That was her past, and these afternoons with Adrian felt like the first truly good thing in her present. "Tell me something real about you," Adrian had said one day. They were sitting on a bench in the garden, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "Real? Something that matters to you. Not small talk. Something real." Miranda had thought about it. "I wanted to be a nurse when I was younger. Got into a great program, full scholarship. But then I met someone and he had different ideas about what I should do with my life. Thought it wasn't appropriate for his image." She paused. "I gave it up. That's my biggest regret. Not the relationship ending, that needed to happen. But giving up something I loved for someone who didn't appreciate it anyway." Adrian had been quiet for a long moment. "Is it too late? For nursing school? Probably. I'm 31. So by the time I finish I'll be 35. "You'll be 35 anyway," Adrian had pointed out. "Might as well be 35 doing something you love." It was such a simple observation, but it had cracked something open in Miranda's chest. She'd spent so long thinking of her life in terms of what was lost, what was behind her, what she couldn't get back. The idea that she could still build something new felt revolutionary. "What about you?" she'd asked. "Tell me something real." Adrian had hesitated. She'd sensed there was something he was holding back, but she didn't push. Everyone had their secrets. "I grew up with a lot of expectations on me," he'd said finally. "My family has very specific ideas about who I should be, what I should do, who I should marry. I've spent my whole life trying to live up to those expectations. Sometimes I wonder who I'd be if I could just choose. For myself. No expectations. No image to maintain. Just me." "Who would you be?" "I don't know." He'd smiled at her. "Maybe I'm figuring that out." Their friendship had deepened over weeks that turned into months. Adrian started timing his visits to match Miranda's volunteer schedule. They'd have lunch together, take walks, talk about books and movies and the ridiculous hospital politics that Miranda was learning to navigate. She told him about her foundation idea, a nonprofit that would provide medical care to underserved communities. He'd encouraged her, helped her think through the logistics, even connected her with some contacts who might be interested in funding. Miranda had fallen in love so gradually she hadn't noticed it was happening. Until one day she'd been laughing at something Adrian said and looked up to find him watching her with an expression that made her breath catch. "What?" she'd asked. "You're beautiful when you laugh." "I laugh all the time." "I know." "I noticed." That night, after months of careful friendship, Adrian had kissed her in the hospital parking lot under the fluorescent lights. It wasn't romantic or cinematic, but it was real. His hands had been gentle on her face, his lips soft against hers, and Miranda had felt something she'd thought was dead inside her flicker back to life. Oh. They'd started dating officially after that. Quiet dates at restaurants where Adrian wasn't recognized. Movies in the afternoon. Long walks through parts of the city where nobody knew either of them. Adrian still hadn't told her much about his family or his work, and Miranda had assumed he was private by nature. She'd respected it. God knows she hadn't been forthcoming about every detail of her past either. It wasn't until Adrian had taken her to meet his parents that everything had clicked into place. The car had pulled up to an estate that made Julian's mansion look like a cottage. Security gates. Guards. A driveway that went on for what felt like miles. Miranda had looked at Adrian with growing confusion. "Where are we?" "My parents' house." He'd taken her hand. "There's something I need to tell you first." And that's when he'd explained. His full name was Adrian Thornfield. His father was Prime Minister Harrison Thornfield. The reason he'd been so careful about where they went, why he'd kept his work vague, why he'd never mentioned his last name, he'd wanted her to know him for who he was, not what his family represented. Miranda had been stunned. Then angry. Then as he'd explained his reasoning, she'd understood. "Everyone who meets me sees my father first," Adrian had said. They see opportunity or connection or power. They don't see me. You saw me. Just me. I couldn't risk losing that. She'd forgiven him because she'd understood. Because she'd done the same thing in her way. She'd never told him about Julian's wealth or the social circles she'd moved in or the ugly, public divorce. She'd let him know her as just Miranda. Just herself. They'd both been hiding in their own ways, trying to find something real in a world full of pretense. Meeting his parents had been terrifying. The Prime Minister was exactly as intimidating as expected. But his wife, Eleanor, had taken one look at Miranda and smiled. Finally, she'd said. Someone real. They'd dated for 2 more months. Adrian had been patient, never pushing, always checking that she was comfortable with how fast or slow things moved. After Julian's controlling nature, Adrian's respect for her autonomy had been intoxicating. He'd proposed on a Tuesday. No grand gesture, no elaborate plan. They'd been back in the hospital garden, the place where their friendship had grown. He'd gotten down on one knee right there on the bench and said, "I don't want to live my life for anyone's expectations anymore. I want to live it with you. Will you marry me?" Miranda had said yes before he'd even finished asking. The wedding had been small, just family at the Thornfield estate. Miranda had worn a simple white dress. Adrian had cried during his vows. The Prime Minister had made a toast about how his son had finally learned what really mattered. Eleanor had welcomed Miranda to the family with genuine warmth. They'd agreed to keep it quiet for a while. Miranda had wanted to launch her foundation on her own merit. Adrian had understood. His parents had been less enthusiastic but had agreed to respect their wishes. And for 3 months, Miranda had lived in this strange dual reality. By day she was Miranda Hayes, divorced and working to build something meaningful with her foundation. By night she was Miranda Thornfield, married to one of the most eligible men in the country, daughter-in-law to the Prime Minister. It had been exhausting maintaining the separation. But it had also been necessary. She'd needed to prove to herself that she could build something on her own, without riding anyone's coattails, without anyone dismissing her work as just another rich wife's hobby project. The foundation gala would change all of that. After next week everyone would know. The dual reality would collapse into one. Miranda wasn't sure if she was ready for that level of scrutiny, but she knew she was ready to stop hiding. Ready to stand beside Adrian publicly and claim the life they were building together. She'd worked too hard and come too far to keep living like her happiness was something to be ashamed of. 6 months before meeting Adrian, Miranda's life had collapsed in the space of a single afternoon. She'd found the hotel receipts in Julian's jacket pocket while checking for his dry cleaning ticket. At first she'd thought it was a mistake. Julian traveled for business all the time. Hotels were part of his routine. But these hotels were local. Same-day check-ins and check-outs. Always the same room number. Always charged to his personal credit card, not the business account. Miranda had stood in their bedroom, holding the receipts, feeling the floor tilt under her feet. She'd known intellectually that this moment could come. Julian had been distant for months. Cold. More critical than usual. Coming home later and later. But knowing something was possible and having proof in your hands were two different things. She'd hired a private investigator. 3 weeks later, he delivered his report with photos that made her physically ill. Julian and Candace, his secretary, entering hotel rooms together. Kissing in restaurant parking lots. His hand on her lower back in ways that weren't professional. 6 months of documented betrayal. Miranda had confronted Julian that night. She'd expected anger, maybe denial. What she'd gotten was so much worse. "Oh, you figured it out." Julian had actually seemed relieved. "Good. I'm tired of sneaking around anyway." "That's all you have to say? What do you want me to say? That I'm sorry? I'm not." He'd poured himself a drink, completely calm. "You've been dead weight for years. No career, no ambition, just floating through life on my success. Candace actually challenges me. She understands the business world. She's a partner, not a pet." The casual cruelty of it had stolen her breath. "I gave up nursing school for you. I never asked you to do that. You said it would be embarrassing for you if your wife had to work. And you chose to listen. That's not on me." Julian had taken a long drink. "Look, this doesn't have to be ugly. We'll get divorced quietly. I'll give you a reasonable settlement. You can move on with your life." But it had gotten ugly. So ugly. Julian's lawyers had been vicious. They'd painted Miranda as a gold digger who'd contributed nothing to the marriage. They'd argued that she deserved minimal support since she'd chosen not to work. They'd brought up every penny she'd spent during the marriage and framed it as evidence of her parasitic nature. Miranda's lawyer had been competent but outmatched. She'd been working with what she could afford, which wasn't much compared to Julian's legal team. The judge had ultimately sided with Julian on most points. She'd gotten a small settlement, enough to live on for maybe a year if she was careful, and none of the property. The house, the cars, the vacation home she'd loved, all Julian's. Apparently, everything purchased during the marriage was his because he'd been the one earning the money. The social fallout had been just as bad. Their friends, she'd thought they were their friends, had chosen Julian. The charity boards she'd served on had quietly stopped calling. Invitations had dried up. People she'd known for years suddenly didn't have time for lunch. She'd moved into a small apartment in a part of the city where nobody knew her. She'd gotten a job as a receptionist at a medical clinic, the only place that would hire someone whose last real work experience was over 8 years ago. She'd volunteered at the hospital because it made her feel useful, like she was contributing something to the world even if Julian thought she'd never contributed anything to their marriage. Those first months after the divorce had been the darkest of her life. She'd wake up at 3 in the morning, unable to breathe, wondering how she'd ended up here. How had she let someone else define her so completely that when they left, she barely knew who she was? She'd considered calling her parents, but they'd passed away years ago. No siblings. The friends she'd had before Julian were long gone, lost to years of prioritizing his schedule over her own relationships. She'd been completely alone. Some days the loneliness had been physical. An actual weight pressing on her chest. Other days it had been freeing. Nobody to answer to. Nobody criticizing her choices or telling her she was wasting her potential by reading to sick kids. Nobody making her feel small. She'd started rebuilding herself piece by piece. The receptionist job had led to a connection with a doctor who'd been impressed by her work ethic. He'd encouraged her to think about going back to school. She'd started researching programs, making plans, imagining a future that looked nothing like her past. The foundation idea had come from Dr. Patterson, the doctor who'd mentored her. He talked about how many people in underserved communities had no access to basic medical care. How preventable diseases went untreated because people couldn't afford to see a doctor. How the system was failing the people who needed it most. Someone should do something about that, Miranda had said. Why not you? Dr. Patterson had asked. It had seemed impossible at first. She had no money, no connections, no experience running a nonprofit. But she'd started researching anyway. Learning about grants and fundraising and nonprofit structures. She'd written a business plan on legal pads during her lunch breaks. She'd reached out to everyone she could think of who might have advice or resources. Most people had ignored her. A few had been patronizing. But some, people like Dr. Patterson, had believed in her vision. They'd offered advice, made connections, opened doors. By the time she'd met Adrian, she'd been in the early stages of building something real. The foundation existed on paper. She had a board of advisors. She had preliminary approval for her nonprofit status. What she didn't have was funding or a clear path forward. Adrian had changed that. Not because of his money or his connections, though those had certainly helped, but because he'd believed in her. He'd seen her vision and said, yes, this matters. Do it. His mother Eleanor had been even more instrumental. Once Miranda had joined the family, Eleanor had used her considerable social influence to arrange meetings with potential donors. She'd coached Miranda on how to pitch her vision, how to ask for money without apologizing for needing it, how to turn a conversation into a commitment. You're not begging, Eleanor had told her. You're offering them the opportunity to be part of something meaningful. That's a gift. The gala next week was the culmination of 6 months of nonstop work. Miranda had secured major donations from 15 different sources. She had programs ready to launch in 3 different neighborhoods. She had staff hired and facilities leased. Her foundation was real, funded, and ready to change lives. None of it would have happened if Julian hadn't thrown her away like she was nothing. Some nights, Miranda lay awake wondering if she should feel grateful to him for that. If being destroyed had been necessary for her to rebuild herself into someone stronger. But mostly she just felt angry. Angry that it had taken losing everything to find herself. Angry that she'd wasted 8 years on a man who'd never valued her. Angry that he'd gotten to walk away unscathed while she'd had to claw her way back to dignity. The anger was useful though. It kept her focused. It reminded her why she could never go back, no matter what Julian might say or do now that she was rebuilding her life. Some doors once closed needed to stay that way. Next week, when Julian saw her at the gala, when he realized what she'd built and who she'd become, she wanted him to feel something approximating what she'd felt. Not the devastation, she wouldn't wish that on anyone. But the realization that he'd thrown away something valuable. that he'd been wrong about her worth. That would be enough. The morning of her wedding, Miranda had woken up alone in the guest room at the Thornfield estate and wondered if she was making a mistake. Not about Adrian, she was certain about him. But about doing this so soon after her divorce. About marrying into a family whose lives would be scrutinized by the press and public. About whether she was ready for any of it. Eleanor had found her sitting on the edge of the bed, still in her pajamas, staring at the wedding dress hanging on the closet door. Second thoughts. Eleanor had asked gently, settling beside her. 100 thoughts, Miranda had admitted. Is that normal? Completely. I almost climbed out a bathroom window before marrying Harrison. Miranda had laughed despite her nerves. You did not. I absolutely did. Got one leg out before my sister found me and dragged me back. Eleanor had taken Miranda's hand. Marriage is terrifying. You're trusting someone with your whole heart and hoping they don't break it. After what you've been through, I'd be concerned if you weren't scared. What if I'm not ready? Are you in love with my son? Yes. Does he make you feel safe and valued and seen? Every day. Then you're ready. Eleanor had squeezed her hand. The rest is just details we'll figure out as we go. The ceremony had been scheduled for 2 in the afternoon. Just family as promised. Adrian's parents, his younger sister Caroline, and a handful of close relatives. The officiant was an old family friend, a judge who'd known Adrian since he was born. Miranda had done her own makeup, her hands shaking slightly as she'd applied mascara. The dress was simple, white lace with a fitted bodice and flowing skirt. Nothing like the elaborate gown she'd worn when she'd married Julian, with its cathedral train and thousands of crystals. That dress had been about making a statement. This one was about getting married. Caroline had helped her with her hair, pinning it up loosely with a few curls framing her face. You look beautiful, Caroline had said. Adrian's going to lose it when he sees you. He's seen me before. Not like this. Not as his bride. Caroline had grinned. I've never seen my brother like this, you know. He's always been so controlled. So careful. You've completely wrecked him in the best way. The ceremony had taken place in the estate's garden. White chairs set up in neat rows. Flowers everywhere, roses and peonies and something purple Miranda couldn't name. String quartet playing softly. It was beautiful in an understated way that felt right for them. Prime Minister Thornfield had walked her down the aisle. Miranda's father was gone, and there was no one else she wanted for that role. Harrison had offered and she'd accepted gratefully. You're good for him, Harrison had murmured as they'd walked. He's been sleepwalking through life. You woke him up. I think he woke me up too. Then you're lucky. Most people never find that. Adrian had been waiting at the end of the aisle in a perfectly tailored suit, and the look on his face when he'd seen her had made every doubt evaporate. He'd watched her approach with tears already streaming down his face, not even trying to hide his emotion. When she'd reached him he'd whispered, "Hi. Hi yourself." The ceremony had been short. Traditional vows that they'd both stumbled over slightly, too emotional to speak clearly. Adrian had slipped the ring on her finger with shaking hands. She'd done the same for him. The judge had pronounced them married, and Adrian had kissed her while their small group of family had cheered. That was it. Simple. Private. Perfect. The reception had been dinner in the estate's formal dining room. The table had been set with china that probably cost more than Miranda's entire apartment. The food had been incredible, course after course prepared by the family's chef. Wine had flowed freely. Toasts had been made. Prime Minister Thornfield had stood with his glass raised. My son has always made me proud, but never more than today. He's found someone who sees him for who he truly is, not for what he represents. That's a rare gift. Miranda, welcome to our family. We're better for having you. Eleanor had cried through her entire toast. I prayed for this. For Adrian to find someone real. Someone strong. Someone who would challenge him and support him and love him exactly as he is. Miranda, you're the answer to years of prayers. Take care of my boy. Caroline had been more irreverent. Thank God Adrian's finally married. Now maybe Mom will stop bothering me about settling down. Miranda, you've done me a huge favor. Welcome to the family and sorry in advance for all the chaos. Adrian had pulled Miranda onto the dance floor after dinner. They'd swayed together while the quartet played, surrounded by family and warmth and acceptance. Nothing like her first wedding, where hundreds of guests had attended and she'd barely spoken to half of them. This was intimate. Real. No regrets. Adrian had asked, his lips close to her ear. Not one. You. Only that I didn't meet you sooner. They'd spent their wedding night at the estate. Adrian had carried her over the threshold of his childhood bedroom, and they'd both collapsed onto the bed laughing at the absurdity of consummating their marriage in a room with his high school soccer trophies on the shelf. Later, wrapped in each other's arms, Miranda had felt a peace she hadn't experienced in years. Maybe ever. This wasn't the desperate, grasping feeling she'd had with Julian, always trying to be enough, always falling short. This was something solid. Something that felt like it could weather storms because it was built on honesty and respect and genuine love. I want to tell everyone, Adrian had said into the darkness. About us. I want to take out a billboard. A billboard? Adrian Thornfield married the most amazing woman in the world. Everyone else can go home. Miranda had laughed. That's a terrible billboard. Fine. We'll work on the copy. But I want people to know. I want to walk down the street holding your hand. I want to introduce you as my wife. I'm tired of hiding something I'm proud of. Soon, Miranda had promised. After the gala. Once the foundation is established. Then we'll tell everyone and deal with whatever comes. You're sure? I'm sure. I need this. I need to know I built something on my own first. Adrian had kissed her forehead. Okay. But the day after that gala, I'm telling everyone I meet. Fair warning. Deal. They'd fallen asleep like that, wrapped together in his too small childhood bed, married and happy and completely unprepared for how complicated their lives were about to become. The next morning, Miranda had said goodbye to the Thornfield family and returned to her apartment, the one she'd kept because she needed space that was just hers. Adrian had understood. They spent most nights together anyway, alternating between his townhouse and her place, but having her own space mattered. After years of living in Julian's world, being consumed by his needs and preferences, Miranda needed to maintain her independence. The ring had stayed on her finger though. She'd worn it hidden under gloves when she went out, but when she was home or with Adrian, she wore it proudly. The weight of it reminded her that she wasn't alone anymore. She was choosing to be with someone, not clinging to them out of fear or need. That distinction mattered more than she could explain. For 3 months, they'd lived in their private bubble. Working on the foundation by day, building their marriage at night. Learning each other's rhythms and quirks and habits. Adrian left wet towels on the bathroom floor. Miranda couldn't go to sleep with dishes in the sink. He was a morning person. She needed 2 cups of coffee before she could form sentences. He liked action movies, she preferred documentaries. They'd learned to compromise, to communicate, to build a life that worked for both of them. It had been the happiest 3 months of Miranda's life. And next week it would all go public. The protective bubble would burst. But she was ready. They were ready. At least she hoped they were. The foundation's office was a converted brownstone in a neighborhood that desperately needed the services Miranda was planning to offer. She'd chosen the location carefully, close enough to downtown to be accessible, but situated in a community where people actually needed medical care they couldn't afford. The building had good bones but needed work. She'd spent weeks overseeing renovations, choosing paint colors and arranging furniture. Her office was on the 2nd floor, small but bright, with windows overlooking the street. She'd furnished it simply, a desk, 2 chairs for visitors, filing cabinets, and a single plant that she kept forgetting to water. On the wall behind her desk, she'd hung the foundation's mission statement, printed in simple black letters. Healthcare is a human right. We exist to make that right a reality. Dr. Patterson had laughed when he'd seen it. Subtle. I'm done with subtle, Miranda had replied. Subtle doesn't change anything. Her staff was small but dedicated. Dr. Patterson had agreed to serve as medical director, working part-time between his hospital shifts. She'd hired 2 nurse practitioners, Lena Rodriguez and James Chin, both of whom had experience working in community health centers. There was also Felicia, a cheerful administrative assistant who kept everything running smoothly, and Terrence, who handled outreach and community relations. They'd opened their doors 6 weeks ago, offering basic medical services on a sliding scale. People could pay what they could afford even if that was nothing. The response had been overwhelming. On their first day, 50 people had shown up. Now they were seeing nearly 100 patients a week. Miranda worked 18-hour days sometimes. She met with donors in the mornings, worked in the office handling paperwork and logistics in the afternoons, and often stayed late into the evening meeting with community leaders or reviewing budget reports. Adrian had expressed concern more than once that she was burning herself out. This matters, she told him. These people need us. I can't slow down when there's so much work to do. You also need sleep. And food. And occasional breaks. I'll rest after the gala. But even Miranda knew that was a lie. After the gala, There would be expansion plans to implement. New facilities to open. More staff to hire. The work would never really be done and she wouldn't have it any other way. One afternoon, a woman named Patricia had come in with her daughter Zoe. Zoe was 7, small for her age and had been coughing for weeks. Patricia had looked exhausted, wearing scrubs from the nursing home where she worked double shifts to make ends meet. "I know she needs to see a doctor," Patricia had said, her voice tight with worry and shame. "But I can't afford it. We don't have insurance. I just started this job and the benefits don't kick in for 90 days. I thought maybe it would go away on its own, but it's getting worse." Lena had examined Zoe and diagnosed a treatable respiratory infection. She'd written a prescription and explained the treatment plan. When Patricia had asked what she owed, Lena had glanced at Miranda. "Whatever you can manage," Miranda had said gently. "Our sliding scale goes all the way to 0. Patricia's eyes had filled with tears. "I can give you $20 right now. I get paid Friday. I could bring more then. $20 is fine. And there's no rush on the rest." After they'd left, Miranda had sat in her office with her head in her hands. This was why the foundation existed. For people like Patricia, who worked themselves to exhaustion and still couldn't afford basic health care for their children. For kids like Zoe who shouldn't have to suffer because of a broken system. Julian would have called it a waste. All this effort for people who couldn't pay. Where was the profit? Where was the return on investment? But this was the return. Zoe getting better. Patricia not having to choose between rent and medicine. People in this community knowing they had somewhere to turn when they were sick or hurt or scared. Adrian had understood immediately when she told him about Patricia that evening. That's what it's all about, isn't it? Those moments. Those moments and thousands like them that we'll hopefully have. Miranda had leaned against him on the couch. Every person we help is someone who might have ended up in the emergency room with a preventable crisis. Or worse, didn't go anywhere at all and just suffered. We're actually changing things. You're changing things, Adrian had corrected. This was your vision. Your work. I'm just lucky enough to watch it happen. But Adrian had been more than just a supportive spouse. He'd used his connections to arrange meetings with potential donors. He'd reviewed her business plans and offered advice on sustainability and growth. He'd shown up at the office after hours to help paint walls during the renovation. He'd rolled up his sleeves and worked beside the staff, never pulling rank or expecting special treatment because of who his father was. The staff adored him for it. Felicia had pulled Miranda aside one day and said, "Your husband is the real deal. You know that, right?" "I know. I mean, I've met rich guys before who do the charity thing for show. He actually cares. He listens. He remembers names. Yesterday he asked Terrence about his daughter's soccer game. He remembered she plays soccer." Miranda had smiled. That's just who he is. The foundation gala had been Adrian's idea initially. "You need a big public launch," he'd said. "Something that announces you're here to stay. That gets media attention and brings in major donors." A gala is perfect. Miranda had been hesitant. Galas were Julian's world. Formal events where rich people paid enormous amounts of money to feel good about themselves while actually contributing relatively little to the causes they supposedly supported. But Adrian had convinced her this would be different. You control the narrative. You decide what gets emphasized. We're not just throwing a party. We're making a statement about what matters and giving people a chance to be part of it. She'd spent months planning every detail. The venue was the Grand Ballroom at the Riverside Hotel, elegant but not ostentatious. The menu was sourced from local businesses whenever possible, with a portion of proceeds going to a food bank. The entertainment was a jazz quartet from a community arts program. Everything about the event was designed to reflect the foundation's values. Tickets had sold quickly. At $500 a plate, it wasn't cheap, but it wasn't outrageously expensive either. The goal was to make it accessible enough that regular people who believed in the cause could attend, while still raising significant funds. Julian and Candace had bought their tickets in the first week. Miranda had seen their names on the list and felt her stomach drop. But Felicia had been thrilled. "Your ex is coming? Oh, this is going to be good." Why is that good? Because he's going to walk in expecting the same scared woman he divorced, and instead he's going to find you running the show. That's called poetic justice, honey. Miranda hadn't thought of it that way. She'd been too busy worrying about the awkwardness, the possibility of confrontation, the questions people might ask about why her ex-husband was attending her event. But Felicia was right. This was her territory now. Her event. Her achievement. Julian was just another guest in the audience. Let him come. Let him see what she'd built without him. Better yet, Let him see what she'd built in spite of him. The week before the gala, Miranda had barely slept. There were a million last-minute details to handle. Seating arrangements to finalize. Speeches to rehearse. Donor packets to assemble. She'd practically lived at the office, surviving on coffee and the sandwiches Adrian insisted on bringing her. "You need to eat real food," he'd said, unpacking containers from their favorite deli. "I ate real food this morning." "Coffee isn't food." "It is if you believe hard enough." He'd sat down across from her desk and waited until she stopped typing and looked at him. "You're ready, you know. Everything's in place. The gala is going to be perfect." "You don't know that." "I do. Because you've checked every detail 17 times. Because you care more about this succeeding than anything else. Because you're brilliant at this." He'd taken her hand. "And because next week, when we tell everyone we're married, I want you to enjoy the look on your ex-husband's face instead of worrying about whether the caterers showed up on time." Miranda had laughed despite her stress. "You're really looking forward to that, aren't you?" "I'm looking forward to everyone knowing you're mine and I'm yours. The fact that it will also destroy your ex-husband's evening is just a bonus." She'd squeezed his hand. "Thank you." "For what?" "For believing in this. For believing in me. For not needing me to be anything other than what I am." "That's the easy part," Adrian had said. "What you are is already everything." While Miranda had been building her foundation, Julian's world had been quietly falling apart. She didn't know this yet. Their lives had diverged completely after the divorce, and she'd made a point of not keeping tabs on him. But the collapse had started months ago, gathering momentum in ways Julian either couldn't see or refused to acknowledge. It had begun with his business partner, Richard Lawson. Julian and Richard had been running Blackstone Investments together for 6 years. The company managed wealth for high-net-worth clients, promising aggressive returns through what Julian called innovative strategies. What he'd failed to notice, or had chosen to ignore, was that Richard's strategies were increasingly creative accounting that bordered on fraud. Miranda had actually warned him about Richard once years ago. She'd been at a company dinner and overheard Richard talking to another partner about moving money between accounts in ways that seemed designed to hide losses. She'd mentioned it to Julian that night. "Richard's doing something with the client accounts that doesn't sound right." Julian had barely looked up from his laptop. "You don't understand finance, Miranda. Richard knows what he's doing." "I'm just saying it sounded." "You're not a partner. You're not even an employee. Stay in your lane." She'd never brought it up again. Now those chickens were coming home to roost. The Securities and Exchange Commission had launched an investigation into Blackstone Investments 3 months ago. They discovered that Richard had been using new investor money to pay returns to old investors, a classic scheme that only worked until it didn't. He'd also been falsifying account statements and moving money between accounts to hide losses. Julian claimed he'd known nothing about it. He'd been focused on client relations and business development, he said, while Richard handled the actual portfolio management. But the investigators weren't convinced that the company's CEO could be that oblivious to what his partner was doing. Even if Julian wasn't criminally liable, the civil penalties would be devastating. The company was finished. Clients were suing. Assets were frozen. The mansion Julian had fought so hard to keep in the divorce was mortgaged to the hilt, and he couldn't make the payments with his income stream dried up. Then there was Candace. His new wife had proven to be expensive in ways Julian hadn't anticipated. She'd wanted a new wardrobe befitting her position as Mrs. Hayes, a luxury car to replace her practical sedan, a membership at the country club, regular spa days, designer handbags, first-class vacations. Julian had provided all of it, wanting to prove that upgrading from Miranda to Candace had been the right call. Look at what he could offer a woman who appreciated success. Look at what he was capable of when he had a real partner instead of dead weight. But now the money was gone and Candace was noticing. The credit cards were maxed out. The country club membership had lapsed. Her last 2 paychecks from work had gone toward household expenses because Julian's accounts were frozen pending the investigation. She'd started complaining. Little digs at first, comments about how other couples they knew were doing better, questions about when his situation would be resolved, suggestions that maybe she should look for a higher-paying job since they needed the income. Julian had brushed it off initially. This was temporary. Once the investigation concluded and cleared his name, he'd rebuild. They'd be fine. Better than fine. But as weeks turned into months, Candace's complaints had grown sharper. Last week, she'd come home from lunch with friends and said, "Susan's husband just bought her a lake house. When are we going to get back to that level?" "We're in the middle of a legal crisis, Candace." "I'm aware. I'm just wondering when it's going to end. This isn't what I signed up for. What you signed up for? We've been married for 6 months. Exactly. 6 months of living in limbo while you figure out this mess with Richard. I gave up my career to be your wife. Julian had wanted to point out that she'd still been working as his secretary when they'd gotten married, and that he'd actually encouraged her to keep her job once they realized how bad their financial situation was. But he'd bitten his tongue. Fighting with Candace wouldn't help anything. The truth was he'd been thinking about Miranda a lot lately. More than he should. He'd see something and think about how she would have reacted. He'd come home to the dark, empty mansion. Candace was always out with friends now, and remember how Miranda used to have dinner ready, how the house had felt warm and lived in. He'd remember how Miranda had supported him through the early years of building his business. How she'd never complained about the long hours or the stress. How she'd believed in him even when things were tight. He'd thrown her away like she was nothing. Convinced himself he needed someone more dynamic, more ambitious, more exciting. And what had that gotten him? A wife who was clearly looking for an exit strategy now that the money had dried up. A business in ruins. A reputation destroyed. The day he'd splashed Miranda at the bus stop, he'd been driving home from a particularly brutal meeting with his lawyers. They'd just informed him that the civil suits alone would likely bankrupt him. That he'd be lucky to walk away from this with anything. That he should start thinking about what kind of employment he could realistically find once this was all over, because managing other people's money was probably off the table. He'd been angry and scared and looking for someone to take it out on. And there was Miranda. Standing at the bus stop in her modest coat, carrying grocery bags, looking like she was barely scraping by. He'd felt a surge of satisfaction seeing her brought so low. At least someone had it worse than him. Candace had egged him on, delighted by the cruelty of it. She'd always resented Miranda in an abstract way, even though they'd never actually known each other during the marriage. Miranda represented what Candace had wanted, to be Julian's wife when he was successful. Now Candace was his wife during his downfall, and the irony wasn't lost on her. Julian had driven home feeling momentarily better. Like he'd won something. But the feeling had faded quickly, replaced by a gnawing sense that he'd just done something he couldn't take back. Not that splashing his ex-wife was the worst thing he'd done to her. But it was so petty. So small. So beneath him. Or at least beneath who he'd thought he was. Now, standing in his study looking at bills he couldn't pay and legal notices he couldn't ignore, Julian wondered when exactly his life had gone off the rails. Had it been when he'd started the affair with Candace? When he'd ignored Miranda's warning about Richard? When he'd convinced himself that success meant constantly trading up, including in his personal life? He heard Candace's car in the driveway. She'd been gone since noon, out with friends again. She came in through the garage, her high heels clicking on the marble floor. "Julian? Are you home?" In the study. She appeared in the doorway, designer bags in hand. His stomach sank. "I thought we agreed you were going to cut back on shopping. I needed a new dress. We're going to that foundation gala next week, remember? I can't show up in something old. Candace, we can't afford. It's already bought. And before you start, it was on sale. Besides, we need to look successful. You said yourself that reputation matters. People are watching to see if you're going to bounce back or collapse." Julian wanted to argue that people would be more impressed if he paid his bills than if his wife wore a new dress, but he didn't have the energy. Fine. Whatever. Candace studied him with narrowed eyes. "What's wrong now? Besides everything? You've been so negative lately. It's exhausting. My business is being investigated for fraud. I'm probably going to lose everything. I'm sorry if that's exhausting for you. See? That attitude. That's what I mean." Candace set her bags down with more force than necessary. "I'm trying to be supportive, but you make it so hard. Maybe if you took some responsibility instead of playing the victim?" "I am taking responsibility. I'm dealing with lawyers and investigators and lawsuits. While I'm stuck here waiting for you to fix it. Do you know what it's like for me? Having my friends ask why we don't go out anymore? Why we can't join them at the club? Having to make excuses for why my husband's life is falling apart." Julian stared at her. This was the woman he'd left Miranda for. This was the partner he'd thought would understand the business world and support his ambitions. She was already looking for the door 6 months in, the moment things got difficult. "If this is too much for you," he said carefully, "you're free to leave." Candace's expression hardened. "Don't tempt me." She grabbed her bags and left. Julian heard her heels on the stairs, then the bedroom door slamming. He turned back to the window. Somewhere out there, Miranda was living her life. The life she'd built after he'd destroyed their marriage. He wondered if she was happy. He wondered if she ever thought about him. Probably not. Why would she? He'd made it very clear what he thought of her. He'd taken everything from her and kicked her to the curb. He'd literally splashed mud on her last week. No, Miranda had probably moved on completely. Forgotten about him. Built something better without him. The thought should have made him angry, but instead it just made him tired. Next week's gala was for some medical foundation. Candace had insisted on going, excited about the chance to dress up and be seen. Julian had agreed because it was easier than fighting. He hadn't even looked at what foundation it was or who was running it. Just another event where he'd have to pretend everything was fine while his world crumbled around him. He could do that for one more night. The day of the gala, Miranda woke up at 5 in the morning despite having only gone to bed 3 hours earlier. Her mind was racing with last-minute details and contingency plans. She gave up on sleep and went for a run, pounding through the quiet streets while the city was still dark. Adrian was awake when she got back, making coffee in the kitchen. Couldn't sleep either? Miranda asked. I slept fine. I'm just excited. He handed her a mug. Today's the day. Everything you've worked for comes together. And everyone learns you're mine. You're really focused on that last part. I've been married to the most amazing woman for 3 months and nobody knows. Forgive me for being excited to finally tell people. Miranda sipped her coffee and felt some of her nervous energy settle. Adrian had a way of making everything feel manageable. What if something goes wrong? Then we'll handle it. Together. He pulled her close. But nothing's going to go wrong. You've prepared for everything. Trust yourself. The ballroom at the Riverside Hotel was stunning when Miranda arrived at noon to oversee final preparations. The events team had executed her vision perfectly. Round tables with crisp white linens. Centerpieces of flowers and candles. A stage with professional lighting. Screens set up for the presentation she'd prepared about the foundation's work. Her staff arrived to help with last-minute setup. Felicia handled registration materials. Terrence reviewed the program with the AV team. Dr. Patterson arrived in a tuxedo that he clearly wasn't used to wearing, tugging at his collar. I feel like a penguin, he complained. You look distinguished, Miranda assured him. And stop pulling at the collar. You'll wrinkle it. By 4 o'clock, everything was ready. Miranda went back to the hotel room she'd reserved to get ready. Eleanor met her there, having insisted on helping. Your family now, Eleanor had said when she'd offered. Let me do this. Miranda's dress was midnight blue, elegant without being overly formal. Fitted bodice, flowing skirt, enough sparkle to catch the light without being flashy. Eleanor helped her zip it up, then started on her hair. Nervous? Eleanor asked. Terrified. Good. That means you care. Eleanor pinned a section of Miranda's hair back. But remember, everyone in that room tonight is there because they believe in what you're doing. You've already won them over. Tonight is just the celebration. And revealing the marriage. That's going to overshadow everything else. Let it. You've been hiding long enough. Be proud of what you have with Adrian. Let people see how happy you are. By 6:30, guests were arriving. Miranda stood in the wings watching the ballroom fill. She saw donors she'd been courting for months. Community leaders she'd built relationships with. Staff from the foundation looking proud and excited. Journalists from several major outlets. Adrian's doing she suspected. And there, near the back, Julian and Candace. Julian looked thinner than she remembered. More tired. His tuxedo was expensive but didn't fit quite right, like he'd lost weight recently. Candace was dripping in jewelry and wearing a dress that was probably worth more than Miranda's monthly budget. They looked uncomfortable, whispering to each other as they scanned the room. Miranda felt a wave of something, not quite satisfaction but close to it. Let them be uncomfortable. This was her world now. Adrian appeared beside her, devastating in his tuxedo. Ready? As I'll ever be. You look incredible, by the way. I should have led with that. Miranda smiled. You look pretty good yourself. The program started at 7. Miranda had carefully choreographed the evening. Cocktail hour with networking. Dinner. A presentation about the foundation's work. Testimonials from patients. And then her speech, which would include the announcement. Dinner passed in a blur. Miranda barely tasted her food, too focused on what was coming. She gave the presentation she'd rehearsed dozens of times, showing photos and statistics about the community's health needs and how the foundation was addressing them. She played a video testimonial from Patricia, the mother whose daughter they'd treated for the respiratory infection. Before the foundation, I didn't know where to turn, Patricia said on screen. I couldn't afford a doctor. I was scared my daughter would get sicker and I wouldn't be able to help her. The foundation gave me hope. They gave my daughter the care she needed. They showed us that we matter. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. Miranda saw people reaching for their checkbooks. Then she introduced Dr. Patterson, who spoke about the medical side of their work. Lena and James shared stories from the clinic. Terrence talked about their outreach programs. Finally, it was time for Miranda's closing speech. She stepped up to the microphone, her heart pounding. 6 months ago I was starting over. I'd just gone through a divorce that left me with almost nothing. No career, no savings, no clear path forward. She saw Julian shift in his seat. I could have been bitter. I could have given up. Instead, I decided to build something meaningful. Something that would help people who felt as lost as I did. She talked about the foundation's mission. About health equity and dignity and the belief that everyone deserved access to care. About the amazing team who'd made this possible. About the donors who'd believed in the vision. But I couldn't have done any of this without one person's support. Someone who believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. Someone who saw possibility where I saw ruins. Someone who taught me that starting over could mean building something better than what came before. Adrian was standing at the side of the room, watching her with pride and love so clear on his face that several people had turned to look at him. 3 months ago, I married that person in a private ceremony. We've kept it quiet while I built the foundation because I needed to prove to myself that I could do this on my own terms. But tonight, I want to share something with all of you. I want you to know that I've been incredibly lucky to find love and partnership when I wasn't even looking for it. She gestured toward the side of the room. Adrian, would you come here? The room erupted in whispers as Adrian walked toward the stage. People were pulling out their phones, clearly recognizing him. He climbed the steps and took Miranda's hand, and the whispers grew louder. For those who don't know, Miranda said into the microphone, this is my husband, Adrian Thornfield. And yes, before you ask, he is the Prime Minister's son. We've been married for 3 months, and I am incredibly proud to finally share that with all of you. Camera flashes exploded. The room burst into applause and excited chatter. Adrian pulled Miranda close and kissed her, to the delight of the guests and the despair of the photographers who weren't quite fast enough to capture it. Miranda looked out at the crowd. Most people were on their feet, applauding. Some were crying. Many were clearly shocked. And at the back of the room, Julian had gone completely white. He was staring at the stage like he'd seen a ghost. Candace was gripping his arm, her mouth hanging open, her expression cycling through shock and confusion and something that looked like panic. Miranda caught Julian's eye across the crowd. She didn't smile or gloat. She just looked at him calmly, then turned back to Adrian. Let him process what just happened. Let him realize exactly what, and who, he'd thrown away. Let him understand that the woman he'd humiliated at a bus stop was now standing on a stage as the founder of a successful nonprofit and the wife of one of the most powerful young men in the country. That was revenge enough. The applause seemed to go on forever. Miranda stood on the stage with Adrian's arm around her, watching the room celebrate their news. But underneath the joy and excitement, she was watching reactions. Some people looked genuinely happy. Others looked stunned. A few were already on their phones, presumably texting the news to everyone they knew. And Julian looked like he was going to be sick. When the applause finally died down, Miranda returned to the microphone. Thank you. Now, let's talk about how we're going to change healthcare in this city. She transitioned smoothly into the fundraising portion of the evening. She outlined the foundation's expansion plans, 3 new clinics in underserved neighborhoods over the next 18 months. A mobile health unit to reach people who couldn't get to a fixed location. A partnership with local schools to provide health education and screening. The price tag for all of it, $2 million over 3 years. I know that's a significant amount, Miranda said. But consider what it means. Thousands of people who currently have no access to care will be able to see a doctor. Children who are sick will get treatment. Chronic conditions will be managed before they become crises. We're not just treating illness, we're investing in healthier communities. She prepared donor packages with different giving levels. Bronze level at $10,000. Silver at $25,000. Gold at $50,000. Platinum at $100,000. The packages were displayed on tables at the back of the room, staffed by volunteers ready to process donations. We have commitment cards at every table, Miranda continued. Please take a few minutes to consider what level of support feels right for you. Every dollar goes directly to providing care. We have no high-paid executives. I'm still living on a volunteer salary myself. This is about impact, not overhead. She stepped back from the microphone to more applause. Adrian squeezed her hand as they walked off the stage together. The rest of the evening was chaos in the best way. People swarmed Miranda and Adrian, offering congratulations and asking questions. How did they meet? When did they get married? Why had they kept it secret? Was there a story there? Miranda and Adrian had agreed on what to share. They'd met at the hospital where Miranda volunteered. They'd fallen in love gradually. They'd married privately because Miranda had wanted to establish her foundation on its own merits first. That was all true and all appropriate to share. What they didn't mention was the depth of Miranda's past with Julian, or how recently her divorce had been finalized, or how complicated those first months of rebuilding had been. That was their private story, not for public consumption. Eleanor and Prime Minister Thornfield arrived halfway through the evening. Their presence caused another wave of excitement and phone cameras. Eleanor embraced Miranda warmly. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered. "You've done something remarkable here." The Prime Minister was more reserved but clearly pleased. "Well done, Miranda. This is exactly the kind of work that matters. You're making a real difference." They worked the room like the political professionals they were, talking to donors and community leaders, lending their considerable credibility to the Foundation's mission. Miranda watched in awe as they operated. This was her family now. These people who could command a room's attention with their presence, who could make donors feel valued and important, who knew exactly what to say to turn interest into commitment. By 9 o'clock, Miranda was exhausted but exhilarated. The donation table was overwhelmed. Felicia kept running up with updates. They'd hit the fundraising goal. No, they'd exceeded it. No, wait, they doubled it. People were writing checks for amounts that made Miranda's head spin. She was talking to a couple who owned a chain of pharmacies about a potential partnership when she saw Julian approaching. Adrian was across the room with his parents, too far away to intercept. Julian looked worse up close. His eyes were bloodshot. His jaw was tight. Candace trailed behind him, her earlier excitement replaced by obvious anxiety. "Miranda," Julian said. "Can we talk?" Every instinct told her to refuse. But they were in public, surrounded by witnesses and cameras. Making a scene wouldn't help anyone. Of course. Miranda kept her voice polite but cool. "Julian, Candace, thank you for coming tonight. You married Adrian Thornfield." Julian said it like an accusation. "The Prime Minister's son." "I did." "When?" 3 months ago." She watched him do the math. 3 months meant right around the time he'd splashed her at the bus stop. Maybe before. Probably before. "So when I saw you at that bus stop." "I was already married, yes." Miranda kept her expression neutral. "Was there something else you wanted to say, Julian?" "I have a lot of people to talk to tonight. He ran his hand through his hair. "I had no idea. You were taking the bus. You looked like you were barely getting by. I thought. You thought I was as pathetic as you tried to make me? That the divorce had broken me? That you'd won?" Miranda's voice was quiet but firm. "You were wrong." Candace grabbed Julian's arm. "We should go." "I didn't know," Julian said again. He looked almost desperate. "Miranda, I'm sorry. For everything. The divorce, the things I said last week at the bus stop." "Stop." Miranda held up her hand. "I don't need your apology. I don't need anything from you. I did need those things once. I needed you to see my value, to treat me with respect, to be the partner you promised to be. But I don't need that anymore. I found someone who gives me all of that without me having to beg for it. I made a mistake." "You did. Several of them. But they're not my problem anymore." Miranda glanced at Candace, who was staring at the floor. "I hope you've both found what you're looking for. Now if you'll excuse me, I have a gala to run." She turned and walked away, her head high. She felt Julian's eyes on her back but didn't look around. Adrian appeared at her side moments later. "You okay?" "I'm perfect." And she meant it. Talking to Julian hadn't hurt the way she'd thought it might. She'd felt nothing but a distant sort of pity for the man who'd tried so hard to diminish her. "Good." Adrian kissed her temple. "Because there are about 6 journalists who want to interview you. Are you up for it?" "Absolutely." The interviews were actually fun. The journalists wanted to know about the foundation, about her plans for expansion, about how she'd gone from volunteer to founder. They asked about Adrian too, but in the context of how they'd met and what he thought about her work. The focus stayed on the foundation, which was exactly what Miranda had hoped for. One journalist from the City Times asked, "Do you have any message for other people who are trying to rebuild their lives after a setback?" Miranda thought carefully. "I think we all have moments where we feel like we've lost everything. Like there's no path forward. But endings can also be beginnings if we let them. The worst thing that ever happened to me freed me to build something I never would have attempted otherwise. So my message is, don't let anyone else define your worth. Not a former spouse, not a boss, not society. You get to decide what your life means. And it's never too late to start over. The journalist smiled. That's beautiful. Thank you. By 11 the gala was winding down. The donors had left, the journalists had their stories, and the staff was beginning cleanup. Miranda's feet ached from her heels and her face hurt from smiling, but she felt lighter than she had in years. Adrian found her sitting at one of the empty tables, shoes off, just watching the cleanup crew work. Successful evening? He asked. Beyond successful. We raised over $4 million. $4 million. Adrian whistled. That's incredible. I know. We can do everything I planned and more. We can hire additional staff. We can fast-track the mobile unit. We can actually make the kind of impact I'd only dreamed about. You did this. Adrian sat beside her. Not me, not my family, not anyone else. You built this from nothing and convinced a room full of strangers to believe in your vision. That's all you. Miranda leaned against him. Can we just sit here for a minute? Before we go home and deal with what comes next. We can sit here as long as you want. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the ballroom return to normal. Tomorrow the news would be everywhere. There would be follow-up interviews and phone calls and probably some criticism from people who thought she'd used Adrian's name for her own gain. There would be complicated logistics to figure out as she navigated being both a non-profit founder and the Prime Minister's daughter-in-law. But tonight, she just wanted to sit with her husband and appreciate what they'd built together. A real partnership. A real marriage. A real life that was theirs and no one else's. By the way, Adrian said eventually, my mother wants to host a proper reception for us. Now that the secret's out. She's already talking about guest lists and venues. Of course she is. We can say no if you want. Miranda thought about it. A big reception would mean more attention, more scrutiny, more time in the spotlight. But it would also mean celebrating with their full community. Introducing Adrian's world to her world. Building bridges between her new life and his. Let's do it, she said. But nothing ostentatious. I want it to feel like us, not like a political event. Deal. Adrian pulled her closer. Ready to go home? More than ready. They gathered their things and headed for the exit. As they passed through the lobby, Miranda saw her reflection in the mirrored wall. She looked tired but happy. Successful. Confident. Nothing like the broken woman who'd stood at that bus stop just a week ago letting muddy water drip down her coat. That woman was gone. In her place was someone stronger. Someone who'd survived the worst and built something beautiful from the wreckage. She caught Adrian's eye in the reflection and smiled. He smiled back, and Miranda felt a surge of gratitude for the strange path that had led her here. Sometimes losing everything was the only way to find out what you were really made of. The morning after the gala, Miranda woke to her phone vibrating non-stop. She groaned and reached for it, squinting at the screen. 53 notifications. Texts, emails, calls. Social media was exploding. Adrian, she mumbled, poking him. Wake up. We're famous. We were already famous. I'm the Prime Minister's son, remember? You were famous. Now I'm famous too. It's very disconcerting. Miranda scrolled through her phone. The news was everywhere. Every major outlet had run the story, some version of mystery woman who married Prime Minister's son revealed, or healthcare advocate Cinderella story. Most of the coverage was positive, focusing on the foundation and Miranda's mission. But there were also gossip pieces speculating about her past, why they'd kept the marriage secret, and whether she'd been with Adrian while still married to someone else. That last one made Miranda's stomach turn. They're trying to make it seem like I had an affair. Adrian looked over her shoulder at the article. That's garbage. We didn't even meet until after your divorce was final. Doesn't matter. They need a narrative. Miranda tossed her phone onto the nightstand. I knew this would happen. Hey. Adrian pulled her close. Ignore it. The people who matter know the truth. Let the gossips gossip. They'll move on to someone else in a week. He was right mostly. Most of the coverage was positive. The foundation was getting unprecedented attention. Donations were still coming in through the website. By noon, Felicia had called 3 times to report that they'd had to shut down the donation portal temporarily because the traffic was crashing the server. This is a good problem, Felicia said on the 3rd call. But I'm going to need to hire someone just to handle the media requests. We've had 17 interview requests this morning alone. Hire whoever you need, Miranda said. Use the discretionary fund if you have to. By evening, the initial frenzy had calmed slightly. Miranda and Adrian ordered dinner in and tried to have a normal evening, but the phones kept buzzing. Eleanor called to check in. Caroline sent a string of celebratory emojis. Dr. Patterson called to say that the hospital foundation had reached out about a potential partnership. This is going to change everything, he said, excitement clear in his voice. We can do things we never thought possible. Miranda felt the weight of it all settling on her shoulders. The expectations, the scrutiny, the responsibility of having so many resources and so many people watching to see what she did with them. You're spiraling, Adrian observed from the couch. I'm not spiraling. You're definitely spiraling. You get this little crease between your eyebrows when you're overthinking. He patted the space beside him. Come here. Miranda sat and Adrian pulled her against him. What's going on in that head? What if I mess this up? What if I can't handle the pressure? What if people start digging into my past and then we deal with it together? Stop trying to carry everything alone. I'm not used to having help. I know, but you do now. You have me, my family, your staff, your board. You have an entire community of people who believe in you. Adrian tilted her face up to look at him. And even if you make mistakes, which you will because you're human, it doesn't change anything. You're still brilliant. You're still making a difference. You're still the woman I love. Miranda felt tears prick her eyes. That's really manipulative, saying perfect things when I'm vulnerable. I know. I'm terrible. He kissed her softly. Feel better? Slightly. Over the next week, the media frenzy gradually subsided. There were still stories, still interest, but the initial explosion of attention faded to a more manageable level. Miranda did several carefully selected interviews, focusing on the foundation's work rather than her personal life. Adrian accompanied her to a few, making it clear they were a united front. The foundation itself was thriving. The $4 million raised at the gala allowed them to fast-track their expansion plans. They broke ground on the first new clinic within 3 weeks. The mobile health unit was ordered and scheduled for delivery in 6 months. They hired 5 new staff members, including a full-time fundraising coordinator. Miranda worked constantly, but now it felt sustainable rather than desperate. She had resources. She had support. She had a clear vision of where they were going. Then, 2 months after the gala, she learned about Julian's situation. Not from Julian himself, they hadn't spoken since the gala, but from a news article about the Blackstone Investments investigation. Former CEO Julian Hayes facing civil penalties in fraud case, read the headline. Miranda almost didn't click on it, but curiosity won out. The article detailed the extent of Richard Lawson's fraud and Julian's alleged knowledge of it. Even if Julian wasn't criminally charged, the civil suits would likely leave him with nothing. The mansion was being foreclosed on. His assets were frozen. He'd lost everything. Miranda felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not pity, just a distant sense of acknowledgement. This was happening to someone she used to know. It wasn't her problem anymore. What she did feel was relief that she'd gotten out when she did. If she'd stayed, she'd be wrapped up in this mess. Her name would be tied to the scandal. She might even be implicated in some way, guilty by association if nothing else. Instead, she was building something real and important while Julian's world collapsed around him. The universe had a strange sense of timing. A week later, Miranda was at the foundation's main office when the receptionist buzzed her. There's someone here to see you. Says her name is Candace Hayes. Miranda's first instinct was to refuse. But curiosity got the better of her. Send her up. Candace looked terrible. Her designer clothes were wrinkled. Her makeup was smudged. Her confident demeanor had crumbled into something frantic. Thank you for seeing me, Candace said, sitting without invitation. I wasn't sure you would. What do you want, Candace? I need advice. About Julian. About the legal situation. I thought maybe, since you were married to him, you might know something that could help. Miranda stared at her. You came here to ask me to help Julian? I know it's a lot to ask, but you must still care about him on some level. You were married for 8 years. And he threw me away the moment he found something he thought was better. Why would I help him? Because he's suffering. Because he made mistakes, but he doesn't deserve to lose everything. Miranda leaned back in her chair. Let me tell you something about Julian. When we were married, I once overheard his business partner talking about moving money between accounts in suspicious ways. I told Julian about it. You know what he said? That I didn't understand finance and I should stay in my lane. If he'd listened to me then, maybe he wouldn't be in this situation now. Candace looked stricken. He told me you never contributed anything to the marriage. He would say that. It's easier than admitting he ignored good advice because he didn't respect the person giving it. Miranda stood up. I'm not going to help Julian. Not because I'm vindictive, but because his problems are his own to solve. Just like mine were. But you found someone rich to marry. You had help. I met Adrian after my divorce was final. After I'd already started rebuilding on my own. And I didn't marry him for his money or his connections. I married him because he treats me like an equal partner. Something Julian never did. Candace's face hardened. So that's it? You just let him drown? I'm not letting him do anything. I'm simply not responsible for saving him. Neither are you, by the way. If you want to leave, leave. Don't stay out of guilt or obligation. Life's too short to spend it with someone who doesn't value you. I'm his wife. So was I. Trust me, the title doesn't mean as much as you think it does. Miranda walked to the door and opened it. I'm sorry you're going through this. But I can't help you. Candace left without another word. Miranda closed the door and leaned against it, processing what had just happened. Part of her felt bad for Candace, she was clearly in over her head. But the larger part felt nothing but relief that this was no longer her life. That evening she told Adrian about the visit. She actually asked you to help him? Adrian was incredulous. The audacity. I think she's desperate. Their lives are falling apart and she doesn't know what to do. Still not your problem. I know. Miranda curled up beside him on the couch. It's strange though. 2 years ago that was my life. Financial chaos. A crumbling marriage. No idea what came next. Now I'm on the other side of it and they're going through what I went through. Do you feel bad for them? No. Maybe I should, but I don't. I feel free. Like seeing them struggle confirms that leaving was the right choice. I'm not glad they're suffering. But I'm not sad about it either. Does that make me a bad person? It makes you human. Adrian kissed the top of her head. You don't owe them anything. Not sympathy, not help, not even your attention. You've moved on. Let them figure out their own path forward. Miranda nodded. He was right. She'd spent too much of her life taking care of Julian's emotional needs, making excuses for his behavior, trying to be enough for someone who would never see her value. She wasn't going to fall back into that pattern now, even from a distance. 3 months after the gala, Miranda received a letter. No return address, but she recognized Julian's handwriting on the envelope. She almost threw it away without reading it, but something made her open it. The letter was short. Miranda, I don't expect you to respond to this. I just needed to say some things I should have said a long time ago. You were right. About Richard, about the business practices, about everything you tried to warn me about. I was too arrogant to listen and now I'm paying the price. But more than that, I was wrong about you. You weren't dead weight. You weren't holding me back. You were the best thing in my life and I was too stupid to see it. You tried to help me be better and I punished you for it. I know it's too late for apologies. I know I destroyed any chance we had. I just wanted you to know that I see it now. I see what I lost. I see what you've built without me. I see that you're exactly as capable and strong and brilliant as I should have recognized all along. I'm sorry. For everything. You deserved better than what I gave you. I hope you're happy. You deserve that too. Julian. Miranda read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and put it in her desk drawer. It didn't change anything. It didn't fix the past or undo the hurt. But it was something. Acknowledgement. Accountability. Maybe even genuine remorse. She didn't respond. What would she say? Thank you for finally seeing my value after throwing me away? There were no words that would make this better or different or meaningful. But she kept the letter anyway. Not because she wanted to dwell on the past but because it was proof. Proof that she'd been right to leave. Proof that the problem had never been her inadequacy but his inability to recognize what he had. Proof that she'd survived something that had tried to destroy her and come out stronger. That was closure enough. 1 year after the gala, Miranda stood in the lobby of the new flagship medical center, watching the ribbon-cutting ceremony preparations. The building was beautiful, modern glass and brick, designed to be welcoming rather than institutional. Inside were examination rooms, a pharmacy, a dental clinic, and community spaces for health education classes. This was the 5th facility the foundation had opened in 12 months. They'd gone from one small office to a network of clinics serving 3 neighborhoods. The mobile health unit was operational, visiting schools and community centers twice a week. They'd seen over 15,000 patients in the past year. They'd hired 40 staff members. They'd partnered with hospitals and medical schools to create training programs for students interested in community health. Miranda had done this. Yes, she'd had help, Adrian's support, Eleanor's guidance, her amazing staff, generous donors. But the vision had been hers. The work had been hers. The relentless drive to make it happen had been hers. You look proud, Adrian said, coming up beside her. He'd been talking to some of the donors who'd arrived early for the ceremony. I am proud. Miranda placed her hand on her stomach, where their daughter was making her presence known with increasingly forceful kicks. We did something real. You did something real. I just cheered from the sidelines. You did more than cheer. But I'll take the compliment. She leaned against him, grateful for his steadiness. 6 months pregnant meant she got tired more easily, and today had been long already. The ceremony was scheduled for 10 o'clock. By 9:30 the lobby was packed. Donors, staff, community members, local politicians and media filled every available space. Prime Minister Thornfield was cutting the ribbon, lending his considerable prestige to the opening. Miranda spotted Dr. Patterson talking to a group of medical students. Lena and James were giving a tour to some journalists. Felicia was managing the crowd with her usual efficiency. Terrence was talking to community leaders about the outreach programs they'd be offering. This was her team. Her people. They'd built this together. At 9:50, Miranda took her place near the entrance for the ribbon cutting. Adrian stood with his parents. Caroline was there with her new boyfriend. Eleanor had her arm through Harrison's, beaming with pride. The mayor gave a short speech about the importance of community health care. Dr. Patterson talked about the medical impact they'd already seen. Then it was Miranda's turn. She stepped up to the microphone, feeling the weight of her daughter settling into her pelvis. Public speaking while very pregnant was an interesting challenge. 1 year ago, I stood in front of many of you at a gala and shared my vision for what healthcare could be in this city. I asked you to believe that we could create a system where everyone, regardless of their ability to pay, could access quality medical care. I asked you to invest in that vision. She looked around the crowd. So many familiar faces. People who'd believed in her when the foundation was just an idea. People who'd worked beside her to make it real. You said yes. You gave your time, your money, your expertise, your energy. You showed up. And because of that, we're standing in our 5th medical facility. We're serving thousands of people who had nowhere else to turn. We're training the next generation of healthcare providers. We're proving that a different system is possible. Miranda paused, letting her hand rest on her stomach. In a few months, I'm going to be a mother. And I want my daughter to grow up in a world where healthcare is a right, not a privilege. Where being sick doesn't mean choosing between treatment and rent. Where everyone is valued and cared for regardless of their circumstances. That's the world we're building here, one patient at a time. The crowd applauded. Prime Minister Thornfield took his place by the ribbon with the ceremonial scissors. Miranda and Adrian joined him, along with Dr. Patterson and several board members. On behalf of the city, Harrison said, I'm honored to declare this facility officially open. The scissors cut through the ribbon. Cheers erupted. Cameras flashed. Miranda felt Adrian's hand on her lower back, steady and sure. They did a brief tour for the media, showing off the examination rooms and equipment. Then Miranda excused herself for a break. Her back was aching and the baby was doing gymnastics. She found a quiet office and sat down, grateful for a moment of peace. Through the window she could see the street outside. Normal people going about their days. Some of them would end up in this building eventually, getting care they needed, being treated with dignity and respect. That's what it was all about. There was a knock on the door. Eleanor poked her head in. Can I join you? Please. Eleanor sat down with a sigh. These heels are killing me. I don't know how you manage while pregnant. I'm planning to burn these shoes ceremonially after the baby's born. Eleanor laughed. I did the same thing after Caroline. Harrison found me in the backyard with a match. She studied Miranda with affection. You've done something remarkable, you know. In just over a year, you've built something that will outlive all of us. That will touch thousands of lives. That's a real legacy. I had a lot of help. Stop deflecting. You had support, yes. But the vision was yours. The work was yours. The determination to see it through despite every obstacle, that was all you. Eleanor reached over and squeezed Miranda's hand. When Adrian first told us about you, I was worried. Not because of anything about you specifically, but because my son has been hurt before. Women who wanted access to his family's influence more than they wanted him. I was afraid you might be another one. I can understand that. But you weren't. You've never used his name for your own gain. You've built this foundation on your own merit. You've made Adrian happier than I've ever seen him. You've become the daughter I didn't know I needed. Eleanor's eyes were suspiciously bright. I'm just really proud of you. Miranda felt tears threatening. Thank you. That means more than you know. Come on. Let's get back out there before people think you've gone into labor or something dramatic. They returned to the lobby where the crowd was beginning to thin. Adrian was talking to a reporter, explaining how the foundation's model could be replicated in other cities. He caught Miranda's eye and smiled, and she felt a rush of love so strong it almost hurt. This was her life now. A husband who loved her completely. Work that mattered. A baby on the way. A family that supported her. A future full of possibility. She thought about where she'd been a year and a half ago. Sitting in a tiny apartment, wondering if she'd ever feel whole again. Volunteering at a hospital because it was the only place she felt useful. Starting over from nothing with no clear path forward. If someone had told her then that she'd end up here, married to the Prime Minister's son, running a successful nonprofit, opening her 5th clinic, pregnant with a daughter she already loved fiercely, she wouldn't have believed it. But here she was. Living proof that endings really could become beginnings if you had the courage to rebuild. The crowd was dispersing. Miranda saw a familiar face near the back. A man in a simple jacket holding a camera with a press badge. It took her a moment to place him. Julian. He looked different. Thinner. Older. The arrogance that had defined him was gone, replaced by something quieter. He was covering the event for a small local publication. She'd seen the name on the media list but hadn't processed that he'd be the reporter. Their eyes met across the room. Julian gave a small nod. Not friendly, not hostile. Just acknowledgement. Miranda nodded back, equally neutral. Then he turned and left, just another reporter filing a story. She felt nothing watching him go. No anger, no satisfaction, no regret. He was just someone she used to know. Someone who'd been part of an old chapter that was definitively closed. Adrian appeared at her side. Was that? Yes. You okay? I'm perfect. And she meant it. She felt lighter somehow, like the last thread connecting her to that painful past had finally been cut. They stood together watching people file out, community members excited to have this resource in their neighborhood, donors satisfied with their investment, staff proud of what they'd built. Ready to go home? Adrian asked eventually. More than ready. My feet are screaming and your daughter is using my ribs as a punching bag. They said their goodbyes and headed for the car. As they drove through the city toward home, Miranda looked out at the streets she'd once walked alone, broken and lost. Those same streets looked different now. Familiar but transformed, like she was seeing them through new eyes. She thought about the woman she'd been, the one who'd let someone else define her worth, who'd given up her dreams to fit someone else's idea of what she should be, who'd believed the lie that she wasn't enough. That woman was gone. In her place was someone stronger. Someone who knew her value. Someone who'd survived the worst and built something beautiful from the wreckage. What are you thinking about? Adrian asked. How far we've come. How much has changed. Any regrets? Miranda thought about it. About the pain of the divorce, the humiliation, the struggle to rebuild. About all the hard days and dark nights when she'd wondered if she'd ever feel whole again. No, she said finally. No regrets. Everything that happened brought me here. To you, to this work, to this life. I wouldn't change any of it. Even the mud incident? Miranda laughed. Especially the mud incident. That was the moment I decided I was done hiding. Done being ashamed. Done letting my past define my future. Adrian reached over and took her hand. I love you. I love you too. They drove the rest of the way in comfortable silence. When they got home, Adrian insisted on carrying her bag despite her protests that she was pregnant, not fragile. Let me help, he said. That's what partners do. Inside, Miranda kicked off her shoes and collapsed onto the couch with a grateful sigh. Adrian brought her water and elevated her feet, fussing until she swatted him away. I'm fine. The baby's fine. We're all fine. I know. I just like taking care of you. You're going to be one of those dads who panics about everything, aren't you? Absolutely. I'm going to be insufferable. Adrian grinned. You signed up for this. Worth it. They spent the evening on the couch, talking about the opening, making plans for the foundation's next steps, discussing nursery colors and baby names. Normal evening conversation for their life now, a life that was everything Miranda had never known she wanted. Later, lying in bed with Adrian's hand on her stomach and their daughter kicking against his palm, Miranda thought about all the people who'd doubted her. Who'd written her off as nothing without Julian's name and money. Who'd thought she'd never amount to anything on her own. She hoped they'd seen today's news coverage. Seen the medical center with her name on the building. Seen her standing beside the Prime Minister, being treated as an equal. Seen the proof that they'd been wrong about her. But more than that, she hoped other women in situations like hers, trapped in marriages that diminished them, told they were worthless, convinced they couldn't survive alone, saw it too. Saw that there was life after leaving. Saw that starting over was possible. Saw that their value wasn't determined by who they were married to or how much money they had or what anyone else thought about them. She hoped they saw it and found the courage to take that first terrifying step toward freedom. Because on the other side of that fear was a life worth living. A life built on your own terms. A life that was truly, completely, authentically yours. Miranda had found that life. And it was better than anything she'd ever imagined.
The cathedral doors swung open just as the officiant asked if anyone objected to the marriage. 200 guests turned in their seats, expecting silence. Instead, they saw her, the ex-wife, standing in the doorway wearing a charcoal gray suit that fit like armor, her expression unreadable, her presence commanding every eye in the room. The groom's face drained of color, his bride froze mid-breath, and the bride's mother, seated in the front row with a string of pearls worth more than most people's cars, leaned back in her chair and whispered to the woman beside her, just loud enough for the groom to hear. He has no idea who she really is. In that moment, standing at an altar he thought represented his arrival into power and wealth, surrounded by the elite of Chicago's business world, the groom realized something that made his knees buckle. The woman he had publicly humiliated, the woman he had called ordinary and forgettable, the woman he had divorced because he thought she had nothing to offer, was about to destroy everything he believed he had earned. Because she didn't just attend this wedding to watch. She came to collect. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And, if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. This is a story about what happens when ambition becomes greed, when love is mistaken for convenience, and when silence is confused with weakness. It's about a man who climbed a ladder he didn't build, only to discover the woman holding it steady was the same one he had kicked on his way up, and it asks a question that might make you uncomfortable. If someone you loved betrayed you for what they thought was a better opportunity, and you had the power to let them destroy themselves, would you intervene, or would you let justice unfold? Her name was Diane Maxwell, 39 years old, quiet in a way that made people underestimate her. She grew up in Detroit, in a neighborhood where houses had bars on the windows and corner stores closed before sunset. Her parents died in a car accident when she was 11, leaving her in the care of her grandmother, a woman who cleaned office buildings at night and invested every spare dollar into index funds. She studied at the public library during her lunch breaks. Her grandmother taught her something most people never learn. Real power doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need to. The people who control the world rarely appear on magazine covers. They work in silence, build in shadows, and move only when the moment is right. Diane absorbed this lesson completely. She studied computer science at Wayne State University on a full scholarship, graduated top of her class, and at 24, started a small software company that developed inventory management systems for mid-sized retailers. She worked from a studio apartment, coding 18 hours a day, surviving on instant ramen and black coffee. 3 years later, she sold that company for $42 million to a logistics firm that had no idea the quiet young woman sitting across the negotiating table had outmaneuvered executives twice her age. She could have celebrated. She could have bought a mansion, a sports car, designer clothes. Instead, she put 90% of the money into a private investment fund, kept living in her modest apartment, and started her next venture. Over the following decade, Diane built an empire so quietly that even people working inside it didn't know she owned it. She acquired struggling companies, restructured them, put competent leaders in visible positions, and collected profits from the shadows. By the time she was 35, she was the majority shareholder in Hartman Global Solutions, a corporate umbrella that owned everything from tech startups to commercial real estate. The public face of the company was a man named Gerald Sinclair, a charismatic former executive she had hired specifically to be the CEO the world saw, while she made the real decisions, from an unmarked office on the 17th floor. Why did she hide? Because her grandmother had warned her. The moment people know you have money, they stop seeing you and start seeing what you can give them. Relationships become transactions. Love becomes negotiation. So, when Diane met Christopher Hayes at a museum fundraiser in downtown Chicago 7 years ago, she introduced herself as a business consultant. It wasn't technically a lie. She did consult. She just happened to own the businesses she consulted for. Christopher was 38 at the time, tall and charming with an easy smile, and the kind of confidence that came from never having faced serious consequences. He worked as a senior operations manager at Hartman Global Solutions, though he had no idea Diane had any connection to the company. He thought she was sweet, a little reserved, not particularly ambitious, but attractive and easy to be around. He liked that she listened when he talked about his career frustrations, his dreams of moving up the corporate ladder, his belief that he deserved more recognition than he was getting. Diane found him refreshing at first. He was different from the calculating executives and investors she dealt with daily. He seemed genuine. He made her laugh. He didn't ask her about money or status. He just wanted to spend time with her. They dated for 8 months before he proposed. They married in a small ceremony at a botanical garden with only close family and a handful of friends. Christopher thought he was marrying a consultant who made a decent living. Diane thought she was marrying a man who loved her for who she was, not what she owned. For the first 3 years, the marriage was good. They lived in a comfortable townhouse Diane had purchased years earlier under an LLC. Christopher assumed they were renting. They took quiet vacations to national parks. They cooked dinner together on weekends. Diane continued running her empire from her private office, taking calls late at night that Christopher assumed were client meetings. He never asked too many questions. He was too focused on his own career. And that's where the cracks started to form. Christopher was stuck. Despite his intelligence and work ethic, he kept getting passed over for promotions at Hartman Global Solutions. Younger colleagues moved ahead of him. People he considered less capable were given corner offices and executive titles. He couldn't understand why. He worked 60-hour weeks. He delivered results. He networked aggressively. But nothing changed. His frustration turned into bitterness. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, that bitterness began to point toward Diane. She didn't network. She didn't attend corporate events unless he specifically asked. She didn't dress in designer labels or drive an expensive car. She seemed content with a simple life. And to Christopher, that started to feel like a lack of ambition, like a weight holding him back. He started making small comments. "Why don't you try to meet more influential people? Why don't you dress up more when we go out? Why are you so comfortable being ordinary?" Diane would smile gently and say she was happy. But Christopher didn't believe her. How could anyone be happy without striving for more? His resentment grew quietly over the next 2 years, until the night that changed everything. It was a company gala at the Drake Hotel. Black tie. Chicago's business elite. Christopher had been looking forward to it for weeks, seeing it as an opportunity to finally make the connections that would push his career forward. Diane attended reluctantly, wearing a simple black dress, staying near the edge of the room while Christopher worked the crowd. That's when he met Natalie Sinclair, 28 years old, blonde, confident, the daughter of Gerald Sinclair, the CEO of Hartman Global Solutions. She had just returned from 3 years working at the company's London office and was being positioned for a leadership role. Christopher was mesmerized, not just by her beauty, but by what she represented: access, status, the kind of life he believed he deserved. They talked for over an hour that night. She laughed at his jokes. She asked about his work. She told him about her father's plans to expand the company internationally. And when Christopher went home that night and looked at Diane reading quietly on the couch in sweatpants, he felt a surge of anger he had never experienced before. This wasn't the life he was supposed to have. Over the following months, Christopher began an affair with Natalie. It started with coffee meetings that turned into dinners that turned into late-night conversations in hotel bars. He told himself he wasn't doing anything wrong. He was just exploring what his life could be. Natalie introduced him to investors, board members, people who mattered. She brought him into rooms where decisions were made. She made him feel important in a way Diane never had. And the more time he spent with Natalie, the more he convinced himself that divorcing Diane wasn't betrayal. It was correction. He was finally choosing the life he deserved. When he told Diane he wanted a divorce, he didn't do it privately. He announced it at a dinner party in front of 8 of their mutual friends, people from his office and their social circle. Diane was sitting across the table from him, holding a glass of wine, when he said it. "I've outgrown this marriage. I need a partner who matches my ambition. I'm filing for divorce." The room went silent. Someone's fork clattered against a plate. Diane set down her wine glass slowly, her face unreadable. One of the guests, a woman named Jessica, asked if this was some kind of joke. Christopher shook his head. "No joke. I'm marrying Natalie Sinclair, Gerald Sinclair's daughter. I'm finally moving forward with my life." He looked at Diane, waiting for tears, for anger, for some kind of reaction that would justify what he was doing. Instead, she folded her napkin carefully, placed it on the table, and stood up. She looked at him for a long moment, her expression calm. "I hope you find what you're looking for." Then she walked out without another word. Christopher felt a rush of relief. No drama, no begging, just quiet acceptance. He told himself this confirmed he had made the right choice. Diane clearly didn't care enough to fight for the marriage. What he didn't know was that Diane went home that night, sat in her home office, and pulled out a file she had hoped she would never need to open. It contained every document related to her ownership of Hartman Global Solutions. Every contract, every shareholder agreement, every corporate structure that kept her identity hidden. She stared at her grandmother's photograph on the desk, the woman who had taught her that silence was strength. Then she made 3 phone calls. One to her lawyer, one to her financial advisor, one to Gerald Sinclair. And then she waited. Christopher moved quickly. The divorce was finalized within 90 days. Diane didn't contest anything. She signed the papers without argument, accepted a minimal settlement that Christopher thought was laughable, and disappeared from his life completely. He moved into Natalie's penthouse apartment overlooking Lake Michigan. He started attending exclusive events, shaking hands with people he had only read about in business magazines. He posted photos on social media with captions about new beginnings and leveling up. His colleagues congratulated him. His friends told him he had made the right choice. And then, Natalie's father offered him a promotion. Senior Vice President of International Operations. A corner office. A significant salary increase. A company car. Everything Christopher had been working toward for a decade. The promotion would become official the day after his wedding to Natalie. Christopher felt invincible. He had escaped a mediocre marriage and stepped into greatness. But what he didn't know was that 3 weeks before the wedding, Natalie's mother made a discovery that would destroy everything. Victoria Sinclair was not just the CEO's wife. She was a former corporate attorney with a sharp mind and an instinct for reading people that had saved her husband from several bad business decisions over the years. She had watched Christopher carefully since he started dating her daughter. Something about him felt off. The way he name-dropped, the way he positioned himself in conversations, the way he talked about his ex-wife with barely concealed contempt. So Victoria did what any protective mother would do. She hired a private investigator to look into Christopher's background. The report came back with nothing alarming at first. Stable employment history, no criminal record, decent financial standing. But then the investigator added a footnote. "There's something unusual about the ex-wife. I can't find much information about her. No social media presence. No public records beyond basic property ownership. But the property she owns is held under an LLC that connects to several other corporate entities. I'd need more time to trace it fully." Victoria told the investigator to keep going. 2 weeks later, the investigator called her with a tone of disbelief in his voice. "You're not going to believe this. The ex-wife, Diane Maxwell, she's not just some consultant. She's the majority owner of Hartman Global Solutions. She owns the company your husband runs." Victoria sat down slowly, The phone pressed to her ear. "Say that again," the investigator explained. Diane had built her wealth quietly over 15 years, acquiring companies through a complex web of LLCs and investment funds. She had specifically structured Hartman Global Solutions to keep her name out of public records, hiring Gerald Sinclair as the public-facing CEO, while she controlled all major decisions from behind the scenes. "She's been the real power the entire time," the investigator said, "and Christopher Hayes has no idea." Victoria hung up and immediately called her husband. When Gerald confirmed the story, admitting that yes, he had always known Diane was the true owner, but had signed strict confidentiality agreements, Victoria felt a cold rage settle over her. Her daughter was about to marry a man who had betrayed the woman who actually controlled his entire career. She told Gerald they needed to confront Natalie immediately. But when they sat their daughter down and explained the truth, Natalie's reaction surprised them both. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She sat very still, processing the information with a calculating expression that reminded Victoria of herself at that age. Then Natalie asked a question that made her mother smile for the first time in days. "Does he know?" "No," Victoria said. "He has no idea." Natalie nodded slowly. "Then don't tell him." Victoria and Gerald exchanged a glance. Natalie continued, her voice eerily calm. "If we tell him now, he'll panic. He'll try to apologize his way back into Diane's good graces, or he'll disappear. Either way, he won't face the full consequences of what he did. But if we let the wedding happen, if we let him stand in front of 200 people believing he's finally made it to the top, and then let the truth come out, he'll understand exactly what he threw away. He'll feel it in front of everyone he's been trying to impress." Victoria studied her daughter carefully. "You want him humiliated." Natalie met her mother's eyes. "I want him to understand that you can't use people and expect no consequences." Victoria made one more call. To Diane. They met at a quiet coffee shop on a Tuesday afternoon. Diane arrived first, sitting by the window with a cup of tea, watching the street outside with the same calm observation that had defined her entire life. Victoria entered exactly on time, her heels clicking against the tile floor. She spotted Diane immediately and walked over. They had never met, but recognition was instant. Victoria sat down across from her. "Thank you for agreeing to meet." Diane inclined her head slightly. "Of course." Victoria didn't waste time. "I owe you an apology. My family didn't protect you from what Christopher did. We should have seen through him sooner." Diane's expression remained neutral. "You're not responsible for his choices." "Perhaps not," Victoria said. "But I am responsible for what happens next." She explained Natalie's plan. Diane listened without interrupting. When Victoria finished, she asked, "What do you want from this?" Diane was quiet for a long moment, her fingers wrapped around her teacup. Then she spoke, her voice soft but steady. "I want him to see that power isn't something you marry into. It's something you build. I want him to understand that the life he thought he earned was never his, and I want him to know that the woman he threw away was the only reason he ever had access to any of it." Victoria nodded. "Then we'll make sure he learns." The final 3 weeks before the wedding were strange for Christopher. Everything seemed perfect. The venue was booked. The invitations had been sent. His promotion paperwork was ready to be signed. Natalie seemed happy, planning every detail with meticulous care. But occasionally, Christopher would catch her looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read, something between pity and contempt. He dismissed it as wedding stress. The ceremony was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon in early October at the Chicago History Museum, a stunning venue with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lincoln Park. 200 guests filled the seats. Business leaders, politicians, socialites, everyone who mattered in Chicago's corporate world. Christopher stood at the altar in a custom tuxedo, his heart pounding with anticipation. The music began. Natalie appeared at the entrance, radiant in white. She walked down the aisle slowly, her eyes locked on his. When she reached him, she took his hands, and the officiant began. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today But halfway through the opening remarks, Victoria stood up from the front row. The officiant paused, confused. Victoria walked calmly to the microphone at the side of the altar. Her voice was clear and steady. "Before we continue, there's something everyone here should know." The room went silent. Christopher's stomach dropped. Victoria continued. "The man standing at this altar divorced his wife because he believed she had nothing to offer him. He pursued my daughter because he thought she represented access to power and wealth. He has spent the last year positioning himself to climb higher in a company he believes is controlled by my husband." The guests leaned forward, confused but captivated. Victoria's voice didn't waver. "What he doesn't know, what he never bothered to learn, is that the company he works for, the promotion he was promised, the entire empire he thought he was marrying into, none of it belongs to my husband. It belongs to the woman he abandoned." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Christopher's face went white. Victoria turned to face him directly. "Diane Maxwell is the majority owner and controlling shareholder of Hartman Global Solutions. She has been for over a decade. You worked for her. You were promoted by her. You were paid by her. And 3 weeks ago, she signed an order terminating your employment, revoking your promotion, and freezing all benefits, effective the moment this ceremony concludes." The room erupted. Voices overlapping. Phones raised to record. Christopher stumbled backward, his eyes wild. "This is insane. This can't be real." The doors at the back of the hall opened. Everyone turned. Diane stepped inside, wearing a tailored charcoal suit, her expression calm and unreadable. She walked down the aisle slowly, her footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. When she reached the front, she stopped a few feet from Christopher. He stared at her, his mouth opening and closing like he couldn't find words. "Why are you doing this?" His voice cracked. Diane looked at him with an expression that was neither cruel nor kind. Just steady. "I'm not doing anything to you, Christopher. I'm simply no longer doing anything for you. There's a difference." He dropped to his knees, tears streaming down his face. "Please, I made a mistake. I'm sorry. Please don't do this." Diane didn't move. "You called me ordinary. You said I brought nothing to the table. You humiliated me in front of people I cared about because you thought I was worthless. I never corrected you because I wanted to see if you loved me for who I was. You didn't. You loved what you thought I could give you, and when you decided I couldn't give you enough, you traded me for someone you thought could." Christopher sobbed openly now, his hands clasped together. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." Diane's voice remained calm. "That's the problem. You never cared to know. You only cared what you could take." She turned to Natalie, who stood watching with quiet dignity. "I'm sorry you were used." Natalie nodded. "So am I." Diane looked back at Christopher one last time. "Goodbye, Christopher." Then she turned and walked out of the hall, her footsteps echoing in the silence. The guests sat frozen. Christopher remained on his knees, broken. Natalie removed her veil, handed it to her mother, and walked out through a side door without looking back. Within a week, the story spread through every corporate network in Chicago. Within a month, Christopher was unemployable in any serious professional capacity. Within 6 months, he was working in sales for a small logistics company, living in a 1-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city. He tried to contact Diane dozens of times. Emails, calls, letters. She never responded. Not out of cruelty, but because there was nothing left to say. Diane continued running her empire quietly. Her name still rarely appeared in headlines. She still made decisions from unmarked offices. She still moved in silence. And every now and then, when she passed her grandmother's photograph in her office, she would pause and remember the lesson that had shaped her entire life. Real power doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need to. So, what would you have done in Diane's position? Would you have revealed the truth sooner, or would you have let him walk into his own destruction? And if someone you loved chose ambition over you, how would you respond? Let us know in the comments. And if this story moved you, wait until you hear what happened when a woman discovered her husband's secret life after 20 years of marriage. Subscribe so you never miss the stories that stay with you long after they end.